I was standing in my mother's hospital room, holding her hand while she slept, when my phone buzzed with the fourth emergency text from my daughter Sarah in 2 hours. Mum, the babysitter cancelled again, and I have the presentation tomorrow. Can you take Emma and Jake overnight? The machines around my mother's bed beeped steadily, marking time like a metronome I couldn't escape. My back ached from sleeping in the vinyl chair for 3 nights running, and I could smell the antiseptic mixing with the faint lavender of the lotion I'd been rubbing on my mother's paper-thin hands. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading for months. I couldn't be everything to everyone anymore. The whole thing had started 6 months earlier when Mom fell in her kitchen and broke her hip. I'd rushed over to find her lying on the linoleum conscious, but disoriented, her reading glasses askew, and a cup of coffee spreading in a dark puddle near her silver hair. "I'm fine, Patricia," she'd insisted as the paramedics loaded her onto the stretcher. "Just a little tumble. You don't need to make a fuss." But it wasn't just a little tumble. The orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Martinez, had been gentle but clear about the recovery timeline during our first meeting in his cramped office that smelled of hand sanitizer and coffee. "Your mother will need significant assistance for at least 3 months. He'd said, his kind eyes meeting mine over wire-rimmed glasses. "Physical therapy, help with daily activities, medication management. Do you have other family members who can share the load?" I'd laughed, but not because anything was funny. "It's just me. My brother lives in Portland, and he's got his own health issues. My sister in Dallas has 3 kids still at home. That's how I became the default caregiver, the daughter who lived closest, who had the most flexible schedule since my husband Robert's death 2 years ago. What had started as temporary help had stretched into a second full-time job that I'd never applied for and couldn't quit. The demands came from all directions. Sarah called every few days with childcare emergencies. Her ex-husband was unreliable, with pickup times her regular sitter kept cancelling, and her job at the marketing firm demanded long hours. My son Michael texted from his apartment across town whenever he needed someone to accept a package, walk his dog, or pick up his prescription when his car was in the shop. And Mom's sweet, stubborn mum insisted she was getting better every day, while I watched her struggle to remember which pills to take and when. "Patricia, honey, could you stop by the grocery store on your way over?" Mum had asked just yesterday morning, her voice thin over the phone. "I'm out of those crackers I like, and I can't seem to manage the shopping cart with this walker." "Of course, Mom," I'd said, adding it to my mental list alongside picking up Sarah's kids from school, taking Mum to her physical therapy appointment, and trying to squeeze in a load of laundry at my own house that I'd barely seen in weeks. The breaking point had come Tuesday evening. I was helping Mum with her shower, steadying her as she stepped carefully over the tub edge when my phone rang from the bathroom counter. "Mom." Sarah's voice was strained, fighting back tears. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but Emma threw up at school and they're sending her home. I can't leave work, we have the big client meeting in an hour, and Brad's not answering his phone again." I looked at my mother, naked and vulnerable, gripping the shower grab bars with white knuckles. She was trying to pretend she couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw the worry lines deepening around her eyes. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I'd said, ending the call. "You go, sweetheart," Mom had whispered. "I can finish up here." But she couldn't. Not really. I'd helped her out of the shower, dried her carefully, and settled her on the couch with a cup of tea before racing across town to collect my sick granddaughter. By the time I got Emma settled at my house with children's Tylenol and a cool washcloth, it was nearly 8 o'clock. I'd driven back to check on Mum one more time, finding her still in her bathrobe, sitting in the dark, because she'd been afraid to get up and turn on the lights. That's when I'd called my friend Janet from book club, desperate for advice. Janet had been through this with her own mother 5 years earlier. "Patricia, you're running yourself into the ground," she'd said, without preamble when I finished explaining. "When's the last time you ate a real meal? Or slept 8 hours straight?" I'd tried to remember and couldn't. But what choice do I have? I can't just abandon them. You're not abandoning anyone by setting boundaries. But you're going to collapse if you keep this up. And then where will they be? Janet's words had haunted me through the sleepless night, and they were echoing in my head now, as I sat in the hospital. Mum had been admitted Tuesday morning with what the doctors were calling acute dehydration and medication confusion. A polite way of saying she'd been mixing up her pills again and hadn't been eating enough. The ER doctor, a tired-looking woman about my age with kind hands, had asked pointed questions about Mum's support system. Has she been managing her medications independently? Dr. Stevens had asked, reviewing the chart. I tried to check on her daily, I'd said, feeling the familiar weight of inadequacy. But sometimes isn't enough for someone in her condition, she'd said gently. Has the family discussed assisted living options? The suggestion had hit me like a physical blow. Assisted living meant admitting I'd failed, that I couldn't handle taking care of my own mother. But looking at Mum's frail form in the hospital bed, I had to face the truth. Janet had been trying to tell me what I was doing wasn't working for any of us. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael. "Hey, Mum. Any chance you could swing by and let the repair guy in? My kitchen sink is flooding and I'm stuck at work until 6. I stared at the text, then at my mother's sleeping face, then at the clock on the wall that read 2:47 p.m. Sarah's kids needed pickup at 3:30. Mum had a meeting with the discharge planner at 4:02. Michael's repair appointment was at 5:0. And somewhere in there, I was supposed to eat lunch, breathe, exist as a human being rather than just a solution to everyone else's problems. That's when Mrs. Rodriguez, the charge nurse, appeared in the doorway. She was a woman about my age, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had seen everything twice. "How are you holding up, honey?" she asked, settling into the second chair with the ease of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. "I'm fine," I started to say, but the words came out cracked and unconvincing. "No, you're not," she said matter-of-factly. "I've been watching you these past few days. When's the last time you went home? Really went home, not just to grab clean clothes?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. "Your mother's going to be okay," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "But she needs more care than one person can provide. Have you talked to the social worker about options? Everyone keeps mentioning assisted living." I said the words, feeling like betrayal. "But I promised I'd take care of her." "And you have. But taking care of someone doesn't mean destroying yourself in the process." She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "I see daughters like you every week. Devoted, loving, running themselves ragged, trying to do everything. You know what happens to most of them." I shook my head. They end up in the bed next to their mothers. Heart attacks, nervous breakdowns, immune systems shot from stress and exhaustion. Then nobody gets the care they need. My phone rang. Sarah again. "Don't answer it," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly. "But she needs to figure out backup childcare that doesn't involve her mother, who's been living in a hospital for 3 days. And your son needs to handle his own plumbing emergencies." I let the call go to voicemail, and something loosened in my chest, just a fraction, like the first thread coming undone in a sweater that had been knitted too tight. "Tell me about the assisted living options," I said. The conversation that followed was both harder and easier than I'd expected. Mrs. Rodriguez explained the different levels of care, the financial aspects, the transition process. She gave me pamphlets for 3 facilities within 20 minutes of my house, all with good reputations, all accepting Mum's insurance combination. "Sunrise Manor has a beautiful garden," she said, pointing to photos in one brochure. "And they have a book club on Tuesday mornings. Your mother mentioned she likes to read. She used to run the library book sale for 15 years. I said, surprised by the pride in my voice. "Before Dad died, and she got smaller somehow. Grief changes us," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "But it doesn't have to shrink us forever. Sometimes a new environment, new routines, new people to talk to it can wake something up again." I was still holding the brochure when Dr. Stevens appeared with Mum's discharge plan. The timing felt like providence, or maybe just Mrs. Rodriguez working behind the scenes. "Your mother is stable," Dr. Stevens said, settling into the third chair that had appeared from somewhere. "But she can't go home to the same situation. The medication errors, the poor nutrition, the social isolation. It's not sustainable." "I've been doing my best," I said, defensive. "I'm sure you have. But your best in an impossible situation isn't the same as the right solution." Her voice was kind but direct. "I'm recommending a short-term stay at a rehabilitation facility, followed by a transition to assisted living if the family agrees." My mother chose that moment to wake up, her eyes fluttering open and focusing slowly on the 3 of us gathered around her bed. "Patricia," she said, her voice hoarse. "What's all the fuss about?" "We're talking about getting you the help you need, Mom," I said, taking her hand. "Someplace where you'll have people around, activities, proper meals." "You mean you're getting rid of me?" she said. But there was more exhaustion than anger in her voice. "I mean, I love you too much to watch you wither away in that house alone, while I run myself into the ground trying to be everything you need." The honesty surprised us both. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she squeezed my hand. "I've been scared," she admitted. "Scared to tell you when I forget things. Scared to ask for help because you already do so much. Scared you'll think I'm a burden. You're not a burden, Mom. But the situation we're in, it's not working for either of us." Dr. Stevens left us with the discharging paperwork and a gentle reminder that I had 24 hours to make arrangements. Mrs. Rodriguez lingered just long enough to slip me her personal card. "Call me if you need someone to talk through the logistics," she said. "And remember, choosing the right care isn't giving up. It's the most loving thing you can do." After they left, Mom and I sat in the quiet of the room, punctuated only by the gentle hum of medical equipment. My phone had buzzed twice more, but I'd turned it face down on the windowsill. "Tell me about these places," Mom said finally. I pulled out the brochures Mrs. Rodriguez had left, and we went through them together. Sunrise Manor really did have a beautiful garden, and their activities calendar included not just a Tuesday book club, but also a quilting circle chair yoga and weekly outings to the farmers market. Willowbrook had a small library and offered cooking classes for residents who wanted to help prepare group meals. Meadowview specialized in residents transitioning from independent living and had a partnership with the local community college for lifelong learning classes. "I could take a pottery class," Mom said, studying the Meadowview brochure with the first spark of interest I'd seen in months. I always wanted to try pottery. I agreed, and I could visit you without worrying about grocery shopping and medication schedules. We could just visit. What about Sarah's children and Michael? This was the conversation I'd been dreading most. They're going to have to figure out their own solutions. I love them, but I can't keep being everyone's emergency contact. That's hard for a mother, she said. It is. But being needed all the time isn't the same as being loved. We spent the rest of the afternoon making calls. Sarah was upset as I'd expected, but after I explained Mom's situation, she softened. I didn't realize it had gotten so bad, she said over the phone. I guess I just assumed you had everything under control. I assumed that too, but we were both wrong. Michael took the news about his plumbing emergency less gracefully. So I'm just supposed to let my kitchen flood, he said when I called to explain why I couldn't help. You're supposed to handle your own apartment like the 32-year-old adult you are, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Call your landlord or a 24-hour plumber. Figure it out. Dad would have helped, he said, playing what he thought was his trump card. Dad's been gone for 2 years, and I've been trying to be both parents ever since. But I can't do that anymore. I need to take care of your grandmother and myself. There was a long pause before he said, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't think about what you were going through. I know you didn't. None of us did. But that's changing now. By evening, I'd scheduled tours at 2 of the assisted living facilities for the following day. Mom would spend 3 more days in the hospital, then transfer to a rehabilitation center for 2 weeks of physical therapy and adjustment support. If all went well, she'd move to assisted living by the end of the month. I drove home that night for the first time in 4 days, really home to my own house, with my own bed and my own quiet. The silence felt strange after the constant hum of hospital machinery, but gradually it settled around me like a familiar blanket I'd forgotten I owned. The next morning I met my neighbor Barbara at our shared fence while I was watering my neglected tomato plants. Barbara was about my age, recently retired from teaching, and had been watching my house pile up with mail and newspapers while I'd been away. How's your mother doing? She asked, leaning against the fence with her coffee mug. I filled her in on the hospital stay and the assisted living plans. Barbara listened without judgment, nodding at the right moments. My sister went through this with her mother-in-law last year, she said. It was hard at first, but now she says it was the best decision they ever made. Her mother-in-law is actually healthier and happier than she'd been in years. I keep feeling like I'm failing her somehow. You're not failing anyone. You're making a tough decision with love and wisdom. Barbara sipped her coffee and studied my face. You look exhausted, honey. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? I tried to think. Before Robert died, I'd had book club with Janet and 3 other women from church. I'd volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturday mornings. I'd taken long walks in the park behind our house and actually noticed the seasons changing. All of that had gradually disappeared under the weight of caregiving and crisis management. I used to go to book club, I said. Janet's been asking about you. We're reading The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo this month. Meeting Thursday night at Carol's house. That idea of sitting in Carol's living room drinking wine and talking about something other than medication schedules and emergency childcare felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. But then I remembered Mrs. Rodriguez's words about daughters who run themselves ragged. I might be able to make it, I said. Good. You need your friends, Patricia. We all do. The assisted living tours went better than I'd hoped. At Sunrise Manor, the director, a warm woman named Linda Chen, showed us around personally. The rooms were bright and spacious, each with a small kitchenette and a view of either the garden or the tree-lined street. The common areas buzzed with activity residents, playing cards, working on puzzles, chatting over coffee in small groups. We encourage family involvement, Linda explained as we walked through the main lobby. But we also recognize that families function best when everyone has appropriate support and boundaries. Mom was quiet during most of the tour, but I caught her watching the other residents with curiosity rather than fear. In the craft room, she stopped to admire a quilt in progress, stretched across a large frame, surrounded by 4 women working with quick, practiced hands. "That's beautiful work," Mom said. One of the quilters, a tiny woman with silver hair and bright blue eyes, looked up with a smile. "We're always looking for new hands." "Do you sew?" "I used to," Mom said. "Haven't in years, though." "Well, if you end up joining us here, come find me. I'm Margaret, and I run the quilting circle. We meet Wednesday afternoons and Saturday mornings." Walking back to the car, Mom was more animated than I'd seen her in months. "The library was nice," she said. "And that Margaret seemed friendly." "You could make friends there," I said. "I haven't had real friends in so long," she admitted. "Since your father died, since I stopped going out so much. I forgot how much I missed having people to talk to who weren't family." "What do you mean?" She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I love you, Patricia. But with you, I'm always the mother who needs help, the burden you have to carry. With friends, I could just be Betty again. A person with opinions about books and politics, and whether the coffee is too strong." The insight hit me like a gentle revelation. I'd been so focused on taking care of her physical needs that I'd forgotten she had emotional and social needs I couldn't possibly fulfill alone. We scheduled Mom's move-in date for 3 weeks later, pending her successful completion of rehabilitation. The paperwork was extensive but manageable, and Linda assured us that the transition team would work closely with Mom to help her adjust. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: cautious optimism. Not the desperate hope that things would somehow get easier if I just tried harder, but actual hope based on a realistic plan. That evening, I called Janet to confirm I'd be at book club Thursday night. "Patricia," she said, genuine joy in her voice. "We've missed you so much. How are you holding up?" I gave her the abbreviated version of recent events, and she listened with the attention that comes from real friendship. "You're doing the right thing," she said when I finished. "I know it doesn't feel like it yet, but you are. It feels like I'm abandoning ship. It feels like you're finally putting on your own life vest," she corrected. "You can't save anyone from drowning if you're drowning yourself." Thursday evening found me sitting in Carol's cozy living room for the first time in 6 months, nursing a glass of red wine and listening to the familiar rhythm of book club conversation. The other women, Janet, Carol, Susan, and Diane, had welcomed me back, without making a fuss, settling easily into our old dynamic. So what did everyone think of Evelyn's approach to her careers versus her relationships? Carol asked, consulting her handwritten discussion questions. I loved how she prioritized her own agency, Susan said, even when it meant making choices that looked selfish from the outside. But she sacrificed so much for independence, Diane countered. Sometimes I wondered if she was running away from intimacy rather than towards strength. The conversation flowed around me, and gradually I found myself pulled in, offering opinions, laughing at Carol's dry observations, feeling my mind stretch toward thoughts that had nothing to do with medical appointments or childcare logistics. "What about you, Patricia?" Janet asked during a lull. Any thoughts on Evelyn's reinvention? I think, I said slowly, that sometimes reinventing yourself means admitting that the version of yourself you've been trying to maintain isn't sustainable anymore. The room went quiet for a moment, and I realized I'd been talking about more than the book. That's very wise, Carol said gently. Change is hard even when it's necessary. After book club, Janet walked me to my car under the soft glow of Carol's porch light. How are you really doing? She asked. Better, I said, and meant it. Scared, but better. It helps to remember that I exist outside of being a caregiver. You exist as a lot of things. Friend, reader, neighbor woman with her own dreams and opinions. Don't lose sight of that again. Mom's rehabilitation went well. I visited every other day, rather than every day giving her space to work with the physical therapists and social workers while giving myself space to breathe. On the days I didn't visit, I tried to do something just for myself, a long walk in the park coffee, with Barbara an afternoon at the library, browsing books I might want to recommend to book club. Sarah called less frequently. And when she did, it was usually to ask for advice rather than emergency babysitting. She'd found a backup childcare service through her company and had started having difficult but necessary conversations with her ex-husband about reliable pickup schedules. I didn't realize how much I was leaning on you, she said, during one of our calls. It wasn't fair. You were doing what you thought you had to do, I said. We all were, but we're all learning better ways now. Michael had handled his plumbing emergency independently and seemed to be approaching his own problems with more maturity. When his car broke down the following week, he called to tell me about it, rather than ask me to fix it. I found a good mechanic, he said. Just wanted to let you know I'll be taking the bus for a few days. That sounds like a good plan, I said, proud of him and of myself for not immediately offering to drive him everywhere. I'm sorry I've been such a pain. Mom. Dad dying was hard on all of us, but I guess I just expected you to keep everything the same somehow. Everything isn't the same, I said. And that's actually okay. We're all different people than we were 2 years ago. Yeah, I think maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. The day of Mom's move to Sunrise Manor was surprisingly smooth. Linda and her staff had clearly done this many times before, and they managed the logistics with calm efficiency. Mum's new room looked out over the garden, and she'd been assigned a table-mate for meals who shared her love of mystery novels. I'm nervous, she confided, as we unpacked her clothes in the small but adequate closet. That's normal, I said. But look, I pointed out the window where several residents were working in raised garden beds, talking and laughing as they tended late-season vegetables. It's not like you're disappearing. You're just changing addresses. Will you still visit? Of course. But now when I visit, we can talk about books and gardens and whether the coffee is too strong instead of me checking your pill organizer and worrying about whether you've eaten lunch. She smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. I think I'm ready, she said. The first few weeks were an adjustment for all of us. Mom called every few days with updates about her new routines, her growing friendship with Margaret from the quilting circle, her discovery that she actually enjoyed chair yoga. I visited twice a week, and gradually our conversations shifted from logistics to connection. Margaret is teaching me a new quilting pattern, she told me during one visit. It's called Wedding Ring, and it's complicated, but she says I have good hands for detail work. You always did, I said. Remember the Halloween costumes you used to make for us? The night costume with actual chainmail made from aluminum rings. Your father thought I was crazy for spending so much time on it, she said, laughing. But you wore that costume 3 years running because it was amazing. I felt like a real knight. These conversations about the past came easier now without the undercurrent of worry about her immediate needs. We were becoming mother and daughter again instead of caregiver and patient. At the same time, I was slowly reclaiming pieces of my own life. Book club became a monthly anchor, and I'd started taking those Saturday morning walks in the park again. Barbara and I had begun meeting for coffee on Tuesday mornings, a standing date that gave structure to my week, without feeling like an obligation. The real test came 6 weeks after Mom's move, when Sarah called with another childcare emergency. I know you said you needed boundaries, she began, but Emma's sick again, and the backup service is completely booked. I have a client presentation this afternoon that I absolutely cannot reschedule. I felt the familiar tug of guilt and responsibility, the ingrained response to drop everything and solve the crisis. But then I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's words, about daughters who end up in hospital beds next to their mothers. I can't help today, I said. But let's brainstorm some other solutions. There was a pause. Then Sarah said, actually, maybe I could ask my neighbor, Mrs. Kim. She retired last year and mentioned she misses being around kids. That sounds like a great idea. Why didn't I think of that before? Because it was easier to call me, I said gently. But easier isn't always better for anyone involved. Later that afternoon, Sarah texted me a photo of Emma coloring at Mrs. Kim's kitchen table, both of them smiling. New backup plan successful, the message read. Thank you for making me figure it out myself. 3 months after Mum moved to Sunrise Manor, I was sitting in my own kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning drinking coffee and reading the newspaper without interruption, when I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The silence in my house no longer felt empty or guilty. It felt peaceful. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring with the next crisis, because I'd helped everyone in my family develop better systems for handling their own crises. Mom was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. She joined not just the quilting circle, but also a current events discussion group, and had volunteered to help with the facility's monthly newsletter. Her world had expanded rather than contracted, and she had a sense of purpose that came from contributing to a community rather than just receiving care. I never thought I'd say this, she told me during my visit that week. But I wish I'd made this move sooner. I was so isolated in that house, even with all your help. Here I feel useful again. You were always useful, Mom, but I didn't feel it. I felt like a problem to be managed. Here Margaret asks my opinion about colour choices for the quilt, and Tom from the discussion group actually listens when I talk about politics. I'm a person again, not just someone's mother who needs help with groceries. The insight was both humbling and liberating. In trying so hard to keep her independent, I'd inadvertently contributed to her isolation. The assisted living facility had given her something I couldn't: peers' routine social interaction and a sense of belonging to a community of people at similar life stages. My own relationships were healing too. Sarah and I had started having monthly lunch dates, just the two of us, where we talked about books and politics and her career goals, rather than just coordinating child-related logistics. Michael had started calling every Sunday evening, not because he needed anything, but because he wanted to check in and share stories about his work and his friends. I like this version of our family better, he said during one of these calls. It feels more sustainable, I guess. It feels more honest, I agreed. Like we're all being our real selves instead of playing roles we thought we had to play. The biggest surprise was discovering that I enjoyed my own company again. The evenings alone in my house, which had once felt like brief intermissions between caregiving responsibilities, had become something I looked forward to. I'd rediscovered cooking, not just heating up freezer meals between crises, but actually following recipes and trying new ingredients. I'd started reading fiction again, books chosen purely for pleasure rather than book club obligations. I'd even begun thinking about travel, maybe joining one of those group tours for women over 50 that I'd seen advertised in the AARP magazine. 6 months after Mom's move, I was pruning my roses on a crisp October morning when Barbara came over with her coffee mug and a thoughtful expression. "You look different," she said without preamble. "Different, House. Rested. Like yourself again." She settled against the fence in her usual spot. "Remember, when you first moved here, you and Robert had just bought the house, and you were so excited about the garden. You spent hours out here planning which flowers would bloom when creating those beautiful seasonal displays. I'd forgotten about that version of myself. The woman who'd researched perennial combinations and spent Saturday mornings at the garden center, who'd hosted neighborhood barbecues and maintained elaborate flower bests just because they brought her joy. I lost track of that somewhere along the way," I said. "Understandably, but it's nice to see her coming back." That afternoon, I drove to the garden center for the first time in over a year. I wandered the aisles of fall plants and winter preparation supplies, remembering the pleasure of planning for future seasons, of believing that I'd be around to see the tulips I planted in November bloom in April. I selected spring bulbs with the same care I'd once used to choose birthday presents, daffodils for early March sunshine, tulips in soft pastels for Easter weekend alliums, for dramatic purple spheres in late spring. The act of planning for my own future, of investing in beauty I'd be around to enjoy, felt like a quiet declaration of independence. At home, I spent the rest of the afternoon planting bulbs while thinking about the year ahead. Book club would continue, of course, and my coffee dates with Barbara. I'd keep visiting Mom twice a week, but our relationship would continue evolving toward friendship rather than dependence. Sarah and Michael would keep learning to manage their own lives with occasional advice and support, but not constant intervention. And I would keep rediscovering who I was, beyond the roles I'd been filling for others. Not just Patricia the caregiver, the problem solver, the woman who dropped everything when family called, but Patricia the reader, the gardener, the friend, the woman who had opinions about politics and wine, who might take pottery classes, or learn to kayak, or book a trip to Ireland just because she'd always wanted to see the countryside. The phone rang as I was washing the soil from my hands, and for just a moment I felt the old familiar tension, the assumption that someone needed something I was expected to provide immediately. But it was Janet calling to confirm our plans for book club the following evening. "What are we reading this month?" I asked. "Circe by Madeline Miller. It's about a woman who discovers her own power after spending years being defined by everyone else's expectations." "Sounds perfect," I said and meant it. The next evening at book club, as we discussed Circe's journey from overlooked daughter to powerful sorceress, I found myself thinking about transformations that don't involve magic, about the ordinary courage required to change course when the path you're on isn't serving anyone well. I love how she learns that being needed all the time isn't the same as being valued, Susan said, echoing thoughts I'd been having about my own life. and how she discovers that helping people grow stronger is different from just rescuing them, Carol added. The conversation continued around the circle, but I was thinking about Mom in her new room at Sunrise Manor, probably finishing up the evening news with her table mates before heading to her room to work on Margaret's latest quilt pattern. I was thinking about Sarah, who'd figured out a reliable childcare network that didn't depend on emergency calls to her mother. I was thinking about Michael, who'd started calling landlord maintenance lines before calling me when his apartment needed repairs. All of us were learning new patterns, better patterns, patterns that allowed everyone to be whole people, rather than just fragments filling roles in each other's lives. Driving home from book club, I made a decision that would have been impossible. 6 months earlier, I was going to book that trip to Ireland. Not someday, not when everyone else was settled, but next spring when the bulbs I'd planted would be blooming in my garden, and Mom would be well established in her new community. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment in the darkness, looking at my house with its warm porch light and the shadows of the roses I'd pruned that morning. It was the same house I'd shared with Robert, the same house I'd left countless times to manage family crises, but it felt different now, like a place I lived, rather than just a home base for caregiving operations. Inside, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The Ireland Tour Company's website glowed in the quiet of my living room, full of pictures of green hills and ancient castles, and women my age smiling in front of dramatic landscapes. I clicked through the itinerary reading about literary sites and garden tours and small group dinners in cozy pubs. By the time I went to bed, I'd filled out the booking form and scheduled a call with a travel consultant for the following day. The deposit would come from the emergency fund I'd built over years of careful saving money I'd been hoarding against the possibility of family catastrophes that might require financial sacrifice from me. But the biggest emergency had been the slow drowning of my own identity under the weight of everyone else's immediate needs. And the solution hadn't been more money, or more time, or more energy. It had been better boundaries, more realistic expectations, and the courage to admit that the way we'd been doing things wasn't working for anyone. As I settled into my own bed in my own quiet house, I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez and her wise words about daughters who run themselves ragged. I thought about Linda Chen and her gentle insistence that families function best when everyone has appropriate support. I thought about Margaret from the quilting circle, who'd helped my mother remember that she was still a person with valuable skills and interesting opinions. And I thought about the version of myself I was slowly becoming, still a mother and daughter and friend, but also a woman with her own dreams, her own schedule, her own right to exist as more than just a solution to other people's problems. The transformation hadn't been dramatic or magical, just a series of small brave choices to stop saying yes to everything and start saying yes to my own life. It had required disappointing people who'd grown accustomed to my availability, but it had also allowed all of us to grow stronger, more independent, more capable of genuine connection, rather than just crisis management. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be everything someone thinks they need, so they can discover what they're actually capable of handling themselves. This is a dramatized story created for entertainment and inspiration, not medical, legal, or financial advice.